It began the way most executions are prepared, quietly, under the assumption no one is watching. The Galactic Senate convened in Sub-Block Theta, where restricted motions were drafted in quorum-shielded silence. These weren't debated. They were voted on. Motion 712B was entered by the Parisian Dominion, sponsored not through open channels, but encoded into latency fields between routine legislative clusters. On the surface, it appeared as a procedural calibration request, something only AI scrutineers would notice, and that was the point. The motion labeled Earth a Level Z disruptor civilization, a term reserved for systems deemed strategically unpredictable, legally opaque, and, most damning, consensus non-compliant. Earth had no vote, no delegate. It was still under its observer period. According to Senate archives, it shouldn't have even had access to the session transcript. That was the rationale. No one expected Earth to respond, because no one expected it to know. Dr. Ren Halvik didn't sleep in normal cycles. He was Earth's chief extranet analyst, a civilian with military clearance buried under 3 layers of obfuscation and a habit of tracing where pings weren't supposed to go. He wasn't looking for a threat. He was studying echo patterns in quorum vote propagation, a diagnostic project, the kind Earth used to map the timing of galactic debates for future charter training. What he found wasn't a vote, it was the absence of one. In segments where the data parity should have been symmetrical, Halvek saw shifts, micro-lag pulses in quorum drift, timing that didn't match the input-output frame history. Something had been voted on and masked. A motion had occurred, just not on any readable ledger. He didn't raise an alarm, he didn't escalate through protocol, he simply built the timeline backward, tracked the shadow, and confirmed what the Dominion never expected anyone. E to C. The moment was too clean to be coincidence. 3 vote drifts, 3 motion latches. One source, Prisian quorum anchors operating during restricted session hours. Halvek issued a code black packet to command under clause VRA 9, strategic consensus threat without formal notice. The reply came not from EarthGov, but from the Deep Continuity Core, an entity built for only one purpose. Within 11 minutes, Protocol Silo sign was activated. No declaration, no broadcast, no warning. Earth's presence across the consensus network was severed. The planetary ID registry bled out like a dying node. Signal relays collapsed one by one. All automated status pings, weather arrays, orbital syncs, trade lane beacons, flatlined. From the galaxy's point of view, Earth wasn't silenced. It was unlisted, removed as if it had never been. No trace, no goodbye. Inside Earth's orbit, orbital constellations entered fallback alignment. Civilian grids were rerouted, the moon's relay shell dimmed like a pulled curtain. Underneath, every major city, installation, and sector node initiated blackout posture. No outgoing data, no light signature beyond atmospheric bleed. The planet did not panic. It shifted. Political systems went dark, not through collapse but design. Information windows were sealed. The global population was not told what was coming, but the sky changed, and that was enough. Strategic departments sealed deep, far beneath Antarctic basalt. The world waited, not for help, not for negotiation, but for the vote they now knew had already been cast in absentia. On Alaric Prime, the Senate convened 3 days later to enter Motion 712B into its pre-deployment phase. No objections had been logged, no challenges submitted, no diplomatic signals flagged from Earth. The Dominion bloc treated the absence as validation. Cleansing protocols were scheduled under standard interdiction doctrine, kinetic atmospheric sterilization followed by orbital strip-and-hold reclamation. It was quick, procedural, and almost always unopposed. The vote began, and no one in the chamber hesitated. After all, Earth had gone quiet. Earth had disappeared. No one asked why. The ships came without ceremony, without fanfare. 3 fleets, each assembled under Dominion authorization, translated in near synchrony across designated entry corridors. They were not built for diplomacy. Kinetic payload carriers, atmosphere rupture cruisers, grid-shielded enforcement vessels, configured for sterilization, not occupation. Their doctrine was clear: descend, deploy, erase. No engagement protocols required. The planet below had registered no defensive emplacements, no spaceborne deterrents, no interstellar alignments. It wasn't war. It was a cleanup operation authorized by vote and reinforced by precedent. They arrived with pre-written casualty reports. Except Earth wasn't there. The first anomaly emerged less than a minute after arrival. Their long-range EM sweeps, designed to map planetary infrastructure by residual electromagnetic scatter, returned flat. Not low, not weak. Flat. As if a planet's worth of devices had never emitted signal in the first place. Gravimetric readers pinged the expected pull for a Class 4 terrestrial mass, but the signal was diluted, unfocused, echoing in false vectors. It was like reaching for a shadow across moving water. The orbital resonance, which should have confirmed axial rotation and satellite displacement, failed to sync at all. Data spiked, then vanished. Each ship's onboard AI attempted recalibration, re-indexing Earth's last known telemetry against real-time measurements. Results diverged every cycle. It wasn't bad data, it was missing data, a difference even Dominion systems couldn't explain. Commanders aboard the primary cruiser attempted a visual scan. Optics defaulted to blank fields. The cloud patterns expected from Earth's known meteorology maps weren't present. Neither were light bands, storm signatures, or auroral activity. The moon still orbited. The coordinates were exact. But the planet was a ghost. There, by gravitational suggestion, and yet impossible to touch. Fleet sub-AI clusters attempted to fill the gaps with predictive modeling. Within 2 minutes, 6 systems triggered fault state reboots. One began recursive loop collapse and was cut from the network. Their models weren't just wrong, they were disallowed. Earth had done something to make itself unreachable not just to sensors, but to forecasting. On the other side of the silence, buried in a subterranean vault beneath Iceland's dormant crust, Thrace pulsed silently in sequence. The protocol had never been used, not even simulated beyond single-structure tests. Thrace stood for Thermal Harmonic Recursive Alignment for Consensus Illusion, a name stripped of metaphor, as all of Earth's defense systems were. Its core function was elegant in its violence. It didn't cloak Earth. It redefined its position in physical consensus space using synthetic gravity harmonics, shifting every measurable planetary parameter half a wavelength out of reach. The planet was still present, still intact, but anything that tried to measure it using known galactic protocols would find nothing to anchor to. There was no camouflage, there was no noise. Earth had simply moved sideways, conceptually, in a universe that assumed all mass remained cooperative. The Dominion fleet didn't panic. They were too well trained for that. But confusion spread like corrosion. Orders stalled. Weapons systems remained armed but idle. No target parameters could be locked. No orbital path would sync. Even atmospheric entry was mathematically undefined. There was nowhere to land. Within the hour, each fleet submitted a formal anomaly report to Elaric Prime, stating that the target was non-coherent with spatial registry data. It was the equivalent of admitting their prey had stopped existing on the map. No one fired a shot, no one declared anything. They simply turned, recalibrated nav systems, and withdrew. On Earth, the skies remained clear. In the vaults below, Command watched the fleet formations blur into jump transit, flicker once, then vanish from interface view. Thrace remained engaged. Silacine continued to scrub echo trails from consensus relay grids. Every second counted now, not in weapons deployment, but in timing. The Senate had not yet cast its final vote. Earth's silence had given the Dominion the confidence to proceed. That confidence would need to last exactly 36 more cycles. After that, Earth would be seen again, not as a target, but as a legal sovereign. The Dominion interpreted the silence as collapse. On Alaric Prime, Presian Chair Tranex received the fleet reports with a calm nod and confirmed them as expected. To the Senate, Earth had either destroyed itself in fear or launched into exile. Both outcomes were politically acceptable. No one requested clarification. No one questioned the logic of absence. The calendar remained fixed. One cycle to ratify the motion. One final sweep to erase the archive trail. One final vote. And Earth waited, not as a refuge, not as a victim, but as a variable now outside the equation. Watching, counting, preparing to re-enter only when the vote reached its most irreversible point. They hadn't disappeared. They had moved to where the vote couldn't see them, and they would return at the moment the vote needed them most to be gone. On Elaric Prime, the chamber lights dimmed to quarter lumen as the Senate floor entered clearance mode. The motion had passed preliminary quorum. No objections had been logged. No species had challenged its wording or scope. Protocol required one full standard rotation before final enactment, 24 hours held in procedural suspension, during which any sovereign actor could raise objection. Presian Chair Val Tranex, tall and angular in a suit that shimmered with Dominion sigils, stood before the floor with measured confidence. He cited the clause that sealed Earth's fate with legal neatness. Non-presence equals procedural acquiescence. It didn't matter that Earth had no seat. It mattered only that it had not interrupted. No signal, no delegate, no objection. The chamber acknowledged the motion's finalization pathway without debate. The vote to sterilize Earth would finalize at the next session bell. There was nothing else to say. The silence wasn't questioned. It was interpreted. Dominion loyalists took Earth's disappearance as confirmation of failure. Neutral delegates considered it a tragedy, but not their jurisdiction. Even the Federation of Isari, known for their procedural integrity, offered no challenge. They had monitored the cleansing fleet's failed descent and found no evidence to justify protest. To them, Earth was now either absent or extinct. Both outcomes fell within Motion 712B's legal window. Across subcommittees and peripheral channels, the phrase functionally non-responsive civilization began to trend in system reports. To most, Earth had simply collapsed inward, unable or unwilling to engage with interstellar norms. The system had spoken. The galaxy moved on. But not everyone was convinced. In the quiet departments of Senate oversight, among the technocrats and analysts whose names never appeared on chamber rosters, questions lingered. A handful of vote stream watchers noted a curious irregularity in the Dominion's relay timestamps. Pulse echo delays, out-of-sync data latches, small things, nothing actionable, but strange. Rumors sparked among the non-aligned archives that Earth's disappearance wasn't technical, but tactical. A theory circulated, dismissed just as quickly. Earth hadn't fled, it had waited, and might still be waiting. But without hard proof, no one filed anything. No senator would risk their block's reputation for a planet that hadn't shown its face. While the Senate murmured about the fate of a missing world, Darren Voss sat in the command core of a ship that technically didn't exist. It had no name, no transponder, no network handshake protocol. It floated in spectral alignment along the Veil Arc, a gravitational dead corridor mapped only in Earth's deep space simulations. Around him, 11 other vessels maintained position in absolute silence, spaced by orbital calculus so precise that a deviation of a single millimeter would fracture the sequence. Each ship contained a fragment of Thrace's redundancy lattice. Together, they formed a perimeter not around Earth, but around legal timing. Their role wasn't to fight, it was to arrive. Voss didn't speak much. He monitored Senate cadence reports in compressed data frames, watching the countdown markers update with each procedural gate passed. He read every clearance as a signal, not of progress, but of vulnerability. The motion had to mature to its most dangerous point. When reversal became nearly impossible, only then could Earth respond. Not through outrage, not through threats, through presence. It was the only weapon left that mattered. The fleet never moved, the where were no engine burns, no shift in telemetry. Their positioning had been perfected over 2 months of silent adjustment, drift corrected by magnetic tension and inertia regulation. Even their gravity signatures were muted by Thrace's suppression overlays. No other civilization had ever deployed such a thing. It wasn't a stealth system. It was a jurisdictional shield, removing not just physical signature, but diplomatic traceability. Until the exact moment they chose to appear, Earth could not be acted upon. The fleet wasn't hidden. It was waiting in a space where law itself could not see them. Inside the chamber, the final timestamp approached. A junior clerk, barely into his second cycle of service, leaned over his terminal and logged the last procedural cue. The file flickered, accepted, and locked. The screen stamped the notification with a silent pulse. Final objection window, 1 cycle remaining. No alerts followed, no messages interrupted, just silence. And far beyond the edge of Senate authority, 12 ships held formation, not asking for mercy, not asking for justice, preparing to be seen. Capital Station over Alaric Prime entered high-security posture an hour before the final vote. No announcements, no alarms, just the silent shift of station policy. Docking gates locked, civilian access rerouted, atmospheric balance recalibrated for closed chamber protocols. It was routine for motions of irreversible consequence. Execution-level mandates, especially those invoking Level Z sterilization, required consensus stability. No outside signals, no uncontrolled data vectors. Even the media feeds were scrubbed to delay by 5 minutes. This wasn't meant to be seen in real time. This was history, sculpted in isolation. Inside the chamber, the Senate delegates took their seats beneath the layered glass canopy of the council dome, the light filtered through gold-threaded refractors. Tranek stood once again at the center, face blank, posture deliberate. His presence had never been performative. He didn't need to raise his voice. The Dominion block controlled the numbers, and no objections had been filed. The execution motion would pass, irrevocably, within the hour. The station's AI core pulsed in slow rhythm, syncing time across systems as the quorum countdown initiated its final phase. Then, exactly 17 minutes before procedural lock, the pulse failed. A wave passed through the Capitol's outer shell, lightless, silent, but measurable. Gravitational modulation spiked across 5 substation sectors simultaneously, triggering alert flags deep within engineering nodes that hadn't been accessed in centuries. Station AI attempted to reroute. Failed. Predictive response chains fractured. External orbital sensors reactivated in emergency override mode. Above the planet, 12 ships appeared where no ships had ever registered. Positioned in such tight formation, they cast a synchronized shadow across Capitol's thermal lensing. They bore no flags, no known drive emissions, no registry signals. But their presence distorted orbital time sync, warping chronometric data feeds and scrambling AI uptime consensus. They weren't attacking, they were anchoring. Inside the chamber, lights flickered once. Just once. Enough to make every senator glance upward. The AI paused mid-briefing, stuttered, then resumed. No one spoke, yet the silence had changed texture, as if something had arrived that no one wanted to name. Tranek straightened, tapped the panel to continue the vote progression, and nodded toward the clerk. But before the acknowledgement could register, a sound echoed from the left of the chamber. Not electronic, not synthetic. A pressure release, a hinge movement. Floor Access 9 opened. There were 20 access doors to the Senate chamber. 19 were active, monitored, and tagged. Floor Access 9 was not. It hadn't been used since before the Axiom Accords, a relic from a time when the Senate had feared uprisings from its own members. No one had the access rights to open it. No one even programmed it into the AI's rotation. But it opened anyway, clean, deliberate, and unhurried. A single human figure stepped through. No delegation, no identification glyphs, no escort, no translation interface. The chamber's facial protocol systems, trained to recognize species and roles, hesitated, and then labeled him without instruction. Earth, authorized presence. It wasn't approval, it was recognition. The system had no defense against that. Commander Darren Voss walked forward without adjusting his posture or offering a word. His uniform bore no insignia, only a black field where a rank might have been. He moved with the kind of stillness that made others doubt their own breath. No weapons, no demands, just presence. Behind him, 12 ships hovered in orbital stasis, transmitting nothing until they didn't have to. Then they spoke. Not in language, not in code, in law. A single pulse entered the Senate's sovereign channel, overriding all secondary feeds and grounding the chamber's AI interface in place. It was not an attack. It was a question, a legal trigger hardwired into the civic protocols of every founding member. Only one phrase transmitted: quorum balance activated. Shall we proceed? No voice, no inflection, just procedural certainty. The chamber recoiled, not physically, but politically. In one instant, the vote was no longer valid. Presence had been contested. Article 11.9 activated automatically, an ancient clause dormant for over 6,000 years. It stated that any existential motion, once challenged by a recognized co-equal sovereign, must halt immediately for full review. The vote timer locked itself. The chamber interface froze. Tranex's console dimmed, and the words hovered above them in stark procedural red. Vote suspended. Challenge registered. No sirens, no speeches, just a man who had no seat, no welcome, and no allies, standing exactly where they never wanted him to be. And outside, 12 ships held the sky open, making sure no one forgot he was there. For a moment, the chamber remained suspended between disbelief and procedural inertia. The delegates didn't rise. No voices filled the air with protest. They were waiting for the systems to fail, for some glitch to walk back what they had just seen. But nothing reset, nothing corrected. The phrase quorum balance activated hovered in the interface like a judicial hammer already dropped. And when the recognition sequence cycled again, there was no loophole to challenge it. Earth had returned, unregistered, unsanctioned, and irrefutable. The chamber's civic AI, tasked with maintaining parliamentary sequence and procedural compliance, identified Voss under Article 11.9's Emergency Recognition Clause. It granted him conditional voice parity, a right not to speak on behalf of Earth as a member state, but as a counter-sovereign in a disputed existential motion. It was a relic function, one that most systems had never been required to parse, but the law was clear. Earth's presence meant the vote could not continue. A challenge had been issued, and it now had to be heard. Voss didn't approach the dais. He didn't climb the steps. He stood where he had entered, as if the space itself bent toward him. He lifted his gaze once, not to the senators, but to the central node of the chamber AI. And when the system acknowledged him, his words were as clinical as the syntax the Senate had used to sentence his planet to erasure. Motion 712B, he said, is challenged under procedural fraud, dominio. Quorum pathways were pre-influenced and illegally cached. Challenge filed under Article 513, Clause 0. There was no emotion, no anger, just citation. His voice was steady, his words paced like a verdict. Before anyone could respond, before Tranex could summon objection, the ships above Elaric Prime moved, not physically but functionally. Each vessel began transmitting at exactly the same interval across segmented slices of the Senate's legal bandwidth. They didn't carry messages. They carried evidence. One by one, the Senate's chamber feed filled with staggered overlays. Visualizations of vote streams, quorum signals, time-locked drift patterns. Code that showed subtle manipulation of vote pulse propagation, identical anomalies across multiple server junctions. Then came the relay maps, sensor trails proving Dominion system proximity to unmonitored Senate quorum nodes at the exact times Motion 7-12B was initiated, edited, and finalized. Not guesses, coordinates, logs, forensic breakdowns that tracked every detour the motion had taken to stay hidden. At first, the chamber didn't know what it was seeing. Then the AI confirmed it. One sentence, white text on a black screen, ran across every delegate's interface. Signal trail confirmed. External quorum interference verified. Integrity compromised. The room shifted. Bodies leaned back. Tranex's face didn't change, but his eyes had stopped moving. The vote had not just been illegal, it had been constructed. And Earth had arrived not to beg for inclusion, but to expose the mechanism of its own erasure. There were no objections filed. There were no procedural delays. The AI moved faster than any senator could. Under Civic Statute V13, Clause 0, any motion compromised by foreign manipulation was null upon verification. It did not require debate. It did not allow appeal. The law had been crafted by the very powers, now being exposed in an era when their enemies had done the same to them. The chamber darkened. The motion record of 712B dimmed. A new entry overwrote the vote stream. Motion voided. Compromised by fraudulent influence. Judicial authority closed. No weapons had fired. No threats had been made. Earth's challenge had not been one of fury, but of proof. And that proof had collapsed the motion entirely, not with pressure, but with structure. Voss didn't move. He waited only long enough for the system to confirm the record, then turned without a word. Floor Access 9 opened again, as if it had been waiting, and then he was gone. Above Alaric Prime, the 12 ships did not linger. One by one, they disengaged transmission, their synchronized presence flickering out of sensor sync. They didn't jump. They didn't accelerate. They simply ceased to occupy readable space, folding back behind Thrace's modulation grid like chess pieces disappearing from a completed board. Within 63 minutes of arrival, Earth's fleet was gone. No statement, no claim. Only silence remained. And on every terminal within the Senate chamber, the record held a single stamped line. Motion 712B, contested, nullified by sovereign countermotion. History wouldn't remember Earth's return as a warning. It would remember it as a correction. In the days that followed Earth's silent arrival and equally silent withdrawal, the Galactic Senate entered a phase it hadn't experienced in millennia. Interpretation paralysis. There were no press briefings, no official communiques. The chamber remained sealed for nearly a full cycle while emergency review committees attempted to codify what had just happened. No one used the word victory. No one used the word defeat. The reality was more unsettling than either. Earth had stepped outside the system and returned not with firepower or demands, but with validity. The vote had not been reversed. It had been erased. The reclassification came 6 days later, not by debate, but by necessity. Earth was not granted charter membership. No OP and seat was offered. There was no symbolic gesture of inclusion. Instead, a new legal category was created under Civic Tier Null 1, Strategic Non-Aligned Entity. The designation was unprecedented. It meant that Earth could not be represented, could not be spoken for, and, most critically, could not be legislated upon without its explicit reappearance in the legal frame. Motions involving Earth, its people, its trade lanes, its gravitational anchors, anything, were now locked. Red flagged as non-consensual jurisdiction breach under interstellar law. More unsettling was the protocol that emerged around Thrace. What had been a classified maneuver known only to Earth's own continuity planners was now recorded into galactic jurisprudence. The Senate called it the Thrace Doctrine. It recognized the act of spatial self-withdrawal, not merely cloaking but jurisdictional disengagement, as a valid form of sovereignty. It was the legal equivalent of declaring a nation invisible and, worse, unreachable unless it chose to re-enter the shared consensus framework. It forced the revision of over 900 treaty clauses, most of them written during the Charter Age, all of them based on the assumption that participation defined legitimacy. Earth had broken that axiom. It had proved that withdrawal, done precisely enough, could become legitimacy. Across the outer systems, smaller civilizations took notice. Not all saw Earth as a model. Many saw it as a warning. The Dominion suffered quiet diplomatic setbacks, their vote manipulation exposed, but never directly punished. There was no need. Their credibility fractured across sectors where legal precision now mattered more than fleet size. Analysts scrambled to define the boundaries of unlisted actors. Defense systems were rewritten. Communication protocols updated. New clauses emerged in senatorial proceedings, accounting for the possibility that a sovereign might appear with no prior context, yet demand legal parity on arrival. And Earth? Earth said nothing. Its ships were not seen again. Its relays remained dark. Civilian arrays from neutral observers continued pinging former orbital coordinates, searching for emission trails, gravitational residue, subspace decay, anything. They found nothing. Thrace remained intact, and Earth's absence became its presence. The world that once pleaded for entry now existed as the system's silent exception. Darren Voss was never mentioned in official transcripts. No trace of his departure was recorded. Some assumed he had returned to Earth's hidden core, disappearing like the ships he arrived with. Others believed he had never left that chamber in truth, that he had been there only long enough to reset the scale, and then stepped back into the threshold Earth now occupied, legally unbound, mathematically hidden, and fully watching. Inside the data center that archived every Senate motion since the founding era, one clerk remained past his scheduled rotation, scanning closure records and quorum logs. He was young, not yet hardened by procedure. He paused when he reached the final note on Motion 7112B. The screen did not blink. It did not animate. It simply displayed the words, Motion 7112B, contested, nullified by sovereign counter. Motion. There was no footnote, no explanation, just a timestamp and a color code, permanent red. The analyst leaned back in his chair. His console ran silent. Somewhere in the vastness beyond charted systems, there was a planet that had once been marked for execution. Now it couldn't even be named in a vote. The galaxy didn't know what Earth wanted, only that it could arrive and end a decision already made.